a former police detective, once renowned for cracking some of London's darkest cases, has stunned the public by going public with information that could bring down the city's mayor, all with a single shocking testimony. His name is John Wedger. After 25 years of service in the force, specialising in serious crimes against children, Wedger chose to speak out when the very system he once trusted turned its back on him as he tried to protect 52 children from a trafficking network. They threatened his career, his home, and even his family, all in an effort to cover up the harrowing truth about a highly powerful figure. If you believe these matters deserve to be exposed, hit follow. Do not expect the mainstream media to tell you. What Wedger uncovered is truly horrifying. Children as young as 9 were forced to work in drug dens, traded in exchange for narcotics, and then moved into hotels in central London, as though they were mere commodities. Who was buying them? By day, it was construction workers, but it did not stop there. They were later taken to luxury restaurants in Mayfair, London's wealthiest district, where they were sold for as much as £2,000 each. And while politicians dined just a few tables away, children were being hawked like objects. And Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, he has avoided answering questions on this matter no fewer than 9 times this year alone. 9 times of silence. This is no longer politics. This is a cover-up. Wedger is not merely making baseless allegations. He holds clear evidence, diaries, internal documents, police reports. He even gave testimony during the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse held in 2022. These are not theories. Everything has been recorded. And the scale of this network is staggering. Tower Hamlets, Camden, Westminster, Haringey. 4 separate boroughs of the capital, all linked to the same trafficking ring. And yet the authorities continue to look the other way. When Wedger attempted to report his findings to his superiors, he was not heard. They did not delay. They actively shut him down. Then came the warning that would chill any officer with a conscience. Stay silent if you don't want to lose everything. Lose your career. Lose your home. Lose your children. Think carefully. A police officer seeking to rescue children was threatened by his own colleagues simply because exposing the truth would tarnish the reputation of the Metropolitan Police. To them, it seemed that preserving appearances mattered more than the fact that 9-year-olds were being dragged into sexual exploitation rings. And the timeline of this matter cannot be overlooked. This was not some short-term operation. It spanned 20 years. 2 decades of systematic brutality unfolding as mayors, commissioners, and governments came and went. There are only 2 possibilities. Either they were all woefully incompetent, or they all knew full well and chose silence. Khan's response speaks volumes. Rather than addressing the details or the evidence, his team dismissed it all as politically motivated. But how can testimonies, clearly documented by police officers themselves, be called politics? How can 52 confirmed victims be brushed aside as nothing more than a political ploy? And the Metropolitan Police are worse still. They have openly admitted that they do not even keep accurate records on child trafficking gangs. Imagine for a moment a fire brigade saying it does not keep track of fires, and then wondering why houses keep burning down. It is absurd. Haringey. Council, meanwhile, claim they have never heard of these allegations. Yet Wedger has made it clear that he previously presented his investigative findings to council representatives. That leaves only 2 possibilities. Either they are lying, or they have lost reports documenting child abuse on an industrial scale. In either case, it inspires no confidence. Just look at how these gangs operated. Children were traded for a packet of cocaine worth barely £50. Later, that same child would be sold in Mayfair for as much as £2,000. This is not petty crime. It is an organised system of trafficking, with its own market segmentation and specific clientele. The locations were no accident. Restaurants in Mayfair are not ordinary eateries. They are the haunts of London's wealthy, the venues where multi-million-pound deals are struck. It is inconceivable, that child trafficking could take place there without anyone noticing. Behind it all lie far larger criminal networks. One cannot exchange a child for drugs without knowing who the supplier is. One cannot book a hotel room without staff noticing something suspicious. And it is utterly impossible to run such an operation for 20 years without protection from someone in high office. On the international level, this affair is not merely a domestic issue for Britain. If wealthy foreign clients did indeed exploit children in Mayfair, then this is a scandal with repercussions far beyond British politics. London is the financial hub of the world, which also means that those involved could have come from anywhere. Yet the most pressing concern is not the international connections. It is the 52 children identified by Wedger. They are now all adults. They have spent these years living with the bitter knowledge that the very system meant to protect them was the one that abandoned them, while those responsible walked free, never held to account. Some will never recover. Some may not even have survived. The involvement of multiple care homes shows that predators exploited the very vulnerabilities of the system. Children in care were already without safe refuge, and if the allegations are true, then it is clear that the entire protective framework was compromised from within. This is not some long-closed chapter from years past. In 2025 alone, Khan has avoided 9 separate questions on the matter. While calls for a nationwide inquiry into child grooming gangs grow louder, the Mayor of London continues to ignore allegations aimed squarely at his own city. The political repercussions are significant. Khan has built his reputation on being a defender of vulnerable communities in the capital. But if any part of these allegations proves true, that image will be shattered entirely. One cannot claim to protect children while turning a blind eye to organised abuse. Even the reputation of the Metropolitan Museum of Art is now under scrutiny. It took years to rebuild trust after a string of scandals. But threatening those who are trying to speak out to protect children, that would be the most disastrous descent of all. For British politics, this is a crisis. If the City of London authorities are powerless against child grooming gangs, what does that say about the entire national system of governance? How can people believe that politicians truly want to protect the most vulnerable members of society? Khan will face immense pressure to resign. When something is merely a matter of political pressure, it can be brushed aside. But now, with a decorated officer stepping forward and presenting clear evidence, ignoring it no longer works. Parliament must speak up. It is inconceivable that the whole country can be gripped by debates on tackling gang crime while pretending that nothing is happening in London, the very place said to be worst affected. The forthcoming investigations will be intense. Any politician who chooses silence will be questioned as to why they did nothing. The police officers who looked the other way will not escape scrutiny either. But most important of all are the children of those years. They deserve justice. They should have been protected 20 years ago. Now they deserve to know the full truth. And they deserve to see, one by one, those who turn their backs on them held accountable. This story will not be buried. The evidence is too clear, the witnesses too credible, the consequences too far-reaching. So, let me ask you this. If a veteran police officer is willing to risk everything to expose child trafficking, yet the political class deliberately ignores it, what does that say about who really runs this country? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And remember to share this video with anyone who needs to know the truth. If you want to hear more about the stories the powerful want to keep hidden, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because when a system can turn a blind eye to the abuse of children, we cannot expect the major news outlets to call it out. We must do it ourselves. The way these operations spanned across different areas makes it abundantly clear that this was not the isolated game of a disorganized gang. Tower Hamlets in the east, Camden in the north, Westminster in the very centre, Haringey also in the north. These locations were not chosen by chance. This was an organised criminal network operating across multiple boroughs and districts. Each area had its own crew, its own victims, its own clients. Yet all followed the same chilling business model. They targeted vulnerable children living in care homes. They lured them with drugs, threatened them with violence, and then sold them to whoever was willing to pay. What Wedger describes about the hotel system makes it clear that this network was built up over many years. You cannot simply ring up and book a random room to begin trafficking. You need staff willing to look the other way. Hotel managers had to act as though they saw nothing. The entire system was designed to conceal the truth. Just imagine the amount of behind-the-scenes work required to make that possible. Transporting children from drug dens to hotels. From there, moving them onto luxury restaurants in Mayfair. Linking up with multiple criminal groups. Maintaining a roster of clients at every level. This demanded meticulous planning, tight coordination, and protection from above. The price disparities alone are proof of that. Some children were traded for nothing more than a few rocks of crack cocaine, worth £50 to £100. Yet afterwards, they were being offered in high-end restaurants for as much as £2,000 each. That figure makes it clear that these were not mere street-level thugs. These were people who understood how to run a market, how to maximize profit. When Wedger spoke of construction workers in central London being involved, the entire picture became even more disturbing. They were not international criminals living beyond the law. They were ordinary men, labourers, builders, yet implicated in the abuse of children. That shows this exploitation was no longer confined to organised gangs. It had seeped into everyday life. How could this happen? Why would working men become the customers of child traffickers? It shows these gangs were not simply meeting an existing demand. They were creating one, normalizing abuse, making it appear commonplace, even acceptable. And the fact that this persisted for 2 decades is what truly chills. This was not some new operation by a modern gang. It ran quietly in the background, across multiple political administrations, changes in the police, and shifts in social services. When it began, Ken Livingstone was still mayor. Then came Boris Johnson, leading London through a period of growth. After him, Sadiq Khan. 3 mayors, 3 different eras of leadership. Yet the abuse continued. Commissioner after commissioner, director after director of social services, one reform after another. But children were still left unprotected. According to former detective John Wedger, this shows that either the system is utterly powerless, or someone at the very top is covering everything up. As for the care homes, supposedly safe places, they became fertile ground for predators. Children in care are already among the most vulnerable. Many have suffered abuse, lack family support, and are moved from one placement to another. They are the perfect targets for those seeking to groom and control. Yet these institutions should have been under strict supervision, with properly trained staff and regular inspections. If traffickers could so easily access children there, then every layer of protection had collapsed. The involvement of drugs makes the picture even more complex. Yet, it is often overlooked. The fact that children were traded for crack cocaine shows that these gangs were operating as part of a wider criminal ecosystem. Not only sexual exploitation, but also drug trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime networks. It is precisely that interconnectedness which allowed them to survive for so long. When you are a cog in a larger machine, you are shielded, tipped off before the police investigate, protected by those who erase evidence, financed with hush money. All of this is documented in Wedger's files. Detailed notes in police logbooks, reports submitted to superiors, sworn testimony before formal inquiries. This is not the tale of a bitter ex-cop making things up. In 2022, an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse officially received his testimony, a serious legal process, subject to strict evidentiary standards. You cannot stand before the law and tell blatant lies without risking prosecution. Wedger's decision to preserve records shows he knew exactly what he was taking on. Seasoned detectives understand. When you accuse the powerful, You must be prepared for retaliation. And the retaliation was very real. Wedger says he was threatened with losing his job, his home, even custody of his children, all because he wanted to expose the truth. That reveals what the Metropolitan Police cared about. Not protecting children, but protecting their reputation. And once you resort to threatening someone simply for speaking out, you are admitting there is something to hide. If there were nothing wrong, why the need for threats? The police response to the allegations did nothing to erase that impression. They spoke about county lines gangs, yet admitted they had no concrete data on groups grooming children. In other words, they had no real grasp of the situation. They also acknowledged that such crimes are rarely reported. Of course, because investigators are warned that if they pursue these cases, they will lose everything. You cannot both admit the system does not take reports seriously, while at the same time creating an environment where anyone who dares to report is silenced. The response from Mayor Khan, delivered through his spokesperson, was entirely predictable. He called the allegations inaccurate, malicious, and politically motivated, yet failed to refute a single specific point. It was a textbook diversion. What is striking, however, is that he has avoided questions on the gangs for an entire year. If the allegations were baseless, why not address them directly from the outset? Why the prolonged silence? And to suggest that Wedger has a political agenda is absurd. He is a decorated police officer with 25 years of experience investigating serious crime. Why would he invent an elaborate criminal conspiracy purely to play politics? The response from Haringey Council is another example of where the problem lies. They claim never to have been informed of these allegations. Yet Wedger insists he personally presented his findings to council representatives. That means either they are lying, or the internal system is so dysfunctional that it lost reports of large-scale child abuse. Either way, it inspires no confidence. The matter becomes even more serious when placed in the wider context. While the country debates how grooming gangs recruit children, London stands accused of covering up something far worse. And the international dimension cannot be ignored. If children were trafficked through luxury restaurants in Mayfair, then clearly the clientele were not limited to British citizens. A global city like London could easily have been serving wealthy clients from around the world. And that is precisely why powerful interests would want the story buried, because it threatens London's image as a safe destination for international investment. The impact on victims is even more devastating. Those children are now adults, carrying the scars of years in which the system abandoned them while their abusers walked free. Some may never have recovered. Some may not even be alive. All have faced the bitter truth that those in positions of responsibility, from politicians to police officers, from social workers to councils, chose to protect the institution rather than the children. For many, that betrayal is even worse than the original abuse. And once the links to London's drug networks are considered, the full picture becomes clear. This is part of a complex criminal underworld, protected, concealed, and allowed to continue in silence.